Welcome to In Bed with a Druid, where I snuggle up with fascinating people as I tempt them to chat intimately about their lives, beliefs, careers, wishes and dreams. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of In Bed with a Druid. Today I'm cuddling up with Traditional Sussex Witch, Druid and author Suzanne Rance. Hello, Sue.
Hello, Ruthie.
There were two in the bed and the little one said...
Thank you for snuggling up in my virtual druid bed. As you can see, we've carved runes all over the bedpost, so hopefully you'll be very comfortable.
Yeah, well, I'm reading them right now.
Oh, good. I don't know what they say, so... You describe yourself as a traditional Sussex witch. Now, that's quite an interesting description. How would you describe your practice?
So it's quite a difficult one. So it actually is part of my history. Yes. So I was actually initiated into a traditional coven back in 1986. And it's based in Sussex. So there's a lot of sort of, you have a coven and then another coven hives off of that coven. Is that easy to understand?
Yeah. So one coven begats another one when you get to a certain degree stage, I would imagine. Is that right?
Yes, in sizes and things.
Are we talking about a Wiccan coven, or because there's all sort of there seems to be loads of different kinds of covens at the moment?
So this is why traditional is one of them.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it's a traditional coven, and it was what I would call my grandfather. Mm-hmm. He was quite a famous witch.
Okay.
That's Ralph Harvey.
Oh, yes, Ralph.
Yes, he's travelled all over the world, and he's talked all over the world, and bless his soul, he's
just not long passed over, has he?
Yes, he's passed over, and so my HPS was initiated by Ralph, and also because it was a long time ago, which people I don't think do so much now, but because it's initiatory, what happens is if you're wanting to work with, say, another group, yes, you may well have to be initiated into their group before they will accept you, because that's how it was. You would be initiated. So my HPS was, in fact, she's been initiated as a Gardnerian witch, as an Alexandrian witch, and there are roots right back to Eleanor Ray Bone.
Wow.
So that's it really is quite a history.
Can I clarify? HPS is
High Priestess.
High Priestess, absolutely.
That's okay. Yes.
And so this kind of it's almost a generational thing. It's like a family, isn't it? One coven will hive off another.
That's right. And then you sort of inherit as you initiated, etc., you inherit that which has gone before. So you become part of that bloodline. Sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Ralph was traditional, definitely. And you've heard about the Alexandrian and the Gerald Gardner,
yes,
Gardnerian. That's Wicca. So in theory, I'm a mix of the whole lot.
Okay.
But with such a rich history there, living in Sussex, understanding about Sussex, even though, to be honest, I probably disappeared off to Wales to become closer to Sussex because I lived in Wales for a while. It was definitely a case of, okay, I'm traditional. We're traditional because I was still with my HPS then. Mm-hmm. And because people have trod there before and brought their own art and their own creation, their own channeling as well. There was a lot of, I suppose, folk magic from Sussex.
Wonderful.
And attachments to, I suppose, the old Saxon stuff as it's sort of developed. Sure. So that's why I would say a traditional Sussex witch, because it is I like working with the land and attached to the land.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I would consider myself to be a traditional Sussex witch. And there are ways of working within that are different from Gardnerian and Alexandrian, certainly.
Is it still happening? We're finding a lot of covens are kind of disappearing or just disintegrating because there aren't enough people joining them. And, it's all to do with the age group getting older. Sadly, we're the older age group now, but...
Yes, we are. It's a tough one, isn't it? Because I think there are youngsters coming in, but they come in online because that's their world.
Yeah.
And so you've got the group, like the Children of Artemis. When I was first initiated, you had to be very careful. You had to be at least 18 years old. We were instructed we should not tell anybody anything that they couldn't find in a book. And even your own children, you weren't supposed to bring your children up in the same way as you were your belief system. You could to a certain degree, because everything that I was told about witchcraft was that witchcraft is witchcraft. It isn't really based on religion.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a magical and celebratory way of working. So it works with seasons, and yes, so there wasn't really very much access to youngsters.
No.
Even at 18.
Because now it's everywhere.
Yes, it is.
It literally, you can't go anywhere without finding it, seeing it, reading books about it. In fact, it's almost fashionable.
Yes, it is. It's a very, very fashionable. And I do find new people because I have been, along with my HPS, we have run a lot of sort of Witchcraft 101 groups.
Oh, that's super.
A moot specifically for people who were interested, who are interested in witchcraft. Not necessarily to run. It wasn't run as a recruitment. It was literally run as we are experienced. These can be the pitfalls that you can find. You can ask us any questions and we will be as honest as we possibly can. We will point you in the way of what good books are and what aren't good books, what good groups might look like, etc., etc. So it's definitely to try and stop people running into the pitfalls.
It's definitely something that's needed, isn't it? And I think, you can see people falling, you as well as I do, you kind of travel around online and think, my goodness, these people are out there floundering.
Yes. Yes.
And it's quite concerning, but I'm not quite sure what we can do about it apart from be accessible if people want to ask questions, I guess.
Yeah. So I suppose in a way, on your earlier question, I don't really practice that much anymore because I became a druid.
Yeah, that was my next question actually. From that, how does druidry merge into that traditional witchcraft?
To be honest, what happened was I went to one of the Anderida camps with my HPS. She said, it was pretty much the first camp of the Anderida camps that was run. Right,
so these are the camps that were run by Kerry Lee and Dave the Bard, right?
Yes, right. That's right, okay. Yes. And so we went along to this camp. It was the first time I'd ever really actually come across any druids at all. I hadn't really met any. I'd always been met up with different witches and things like that. And I loved everybody. I really, really loved everybody because I'm such an open person myself. I'm honest. I do not like to hide anything. There was a lot of things about witchcraft that didn't sit quite well with me.
Sure.
So I enjoyed the fact that it celebrated all of the seasons. That's the reason I really actually joined. Not so much the magic. It was definitely the seasons. And of course, the OBOD hadn't been restarted at the time I was initiated. It wasn't for another couple of years. So I stuck with what I knew, And then there was the camp, and I'm thinking, I love these people. These people, they're open, they're honest, they're jolly, they sing, they tell poetry, they sit around a big fire and tell stories. You know, they hug. And I fell in love with the Awen, which is the singing part, you know, doing the R-U-N.
Yeah, the chant.
And the chant. And I just felt it was all encompassing. It was something I was missing because I wasn't doing anything specifically like that in witchcraft. So I joined OBOD so I could learn about the people that I'd just met. And then I never missed a camp after that.
I was going to say no. And lots of people, I mean, we're sort of in the same circles, and
yes.
And I've heard lots of people say they've walked to even an Anderida open ritual camps, and they've walked in and suddenly gone, I'm home. Because they are so inclusive. They are such lovely people. Yeah. And fabulous bunch of folks. Those.
Definitely.
You're also a member of the ADO.
The Anglesey Druid Order.
The lovely Anglesey Druid Order. Can you tell us a little bit about them and your practice with them? Because you're obviously you're living up in Sussex now. So.
Yes. So what really, really appealed to me about the Anglesey Druid Order was they work a lot with the Mabinogion stories, the old British stories from the 6th, 7th, 8th century. Some of them had come back in with the Normans and been sort of rewritten, but they were stories that come from that time and they were written down. And within those stories, there's a lot of magic they're like fairy stories. There is magic in fairy stories. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have studied these, and especially the Anglesey Druid Order, and found the connections. They've linked the connections because the head of the order, Chris, is a Welsh speaker, first language Welsh speaker. He has the advantage, and he can read the Middle Welsh, and he can seek out, and he knows a lot of scholars as well, seek out what's actually meant in those stories. And the Anglesey Druid Order do follow the gods and goddesses that are within those stories, the gods and goddesses of the land of Wales. Mm-hmm. Now, I've always felt as if I've been half Welsh and half Anglo-Saxon. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Do you know why? Do you have Welsh in your family? Is there something in your blood, or is it just something that sort of went, I'm here, I'm home?
It was just something that I felt. The first time I went to Wales, I think I was about 13 or 14, and I actually went with a Christian missionary group whose mission was out in Nepal. Mm-hmm. And they had holidays for teenagers. So it was a youth group, and I went out to Wales. We went and I went to a church service in Ogmore-on-Sea, which is on the south coast, and the whole thing was in Welsh. And I'm thinking, what's this? This is a totally different language. And then in my later teens, by the time I was 17, 18, I had friends who went to Cardiff University, used to go up there, mm-hmm. fell in love with the land there as well, did feel at home. And I moved there, it was about in the mid-90s. Okay. I went and lived there in the mid-90s. I've learnt to speak Welsh, so I can speak Welsh myself. I learnt a lot about the culture. Until my daughter became 18, and then she wanted to move out. My ex-husband, as he is now, moved off to America, and I was left in Wales with my son, who wasn't happy at school. Sure. And all of my family were in Sussex.
So it was up and come back home.
I up and came back, and I've been learning a lot about Sussex through learning about Wales.
That was my next question. I did read on your biography that you feel that there's a connection between Wales and Sussex. There are similarities. What are those? I mean, that wouldn't necessarily leap to mind from what I know of Sussex. I'd be really interested to know what those connections are.
Well, I can find two really good. The first one that I really, really found was when I was learning to speak Welsh, I was reading a play called Shuan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Shuan was actually King John's illegitimate daughter Joan, but she was called Shuan in Welsh.
Oh, right, okay.
She was married to Llywelyn Fawr, the major king in Wales at the time.
Sure.
And the story is an amazingly romantic story whereby a guy called Gwilym Broyce was actually hanged by Llywelyn Fawr because he was found in his wife's bedchamber.
Oh.
He was hanged on the 1st of May.
Of course.
So there's all this, and I'm thinking, Gwilym Broyce, something about that rings a bell. Happens to be William de Braose.
Oh,
William
really?
de Braose is Beeding. He had a castle at Beeding.
Yes.
So although he's a marcher lord, he had a castle at Beeding, and I'm thinking, wow,
that's a huge connection.
That is a massive, great big connection. And then also later on, I suppose in my Druidry and bits and pieces, when we go out and we look for a really, really nice place where we can practice in the land if we possibly can. And not very far from where I live, there is an Iron Age temple site.
Okay, yeah.
And it had Iron Age settlement all around it. And then there's also down at the bottom of the hill, there is something that's called the Roman Well, or a Roman well that's marked on the Ordnance Survey. They went down that well. It was found in the 1950s when a tractor lost its back wheels there.
Oh, wow.
And they sent a diving team down there to see it because they didn't know what was down there. And it was lined in flint and everything. It was dry.
Uh-huh.
It was 270 feet deep.
Wow.
Well, when I was in Wales, I'd been studying all of the sort of the Celtic bits and pieces and things like that. And I was reading Dr. Anne Ross, and she was talking about these ritual pits that were like shafts, ritual shafts and ritual pits. And this really and truly is a ritual shaft.
Wow.
But it was the same time, because in her book it talks about it running in slightly different timeline from other, the temples on hills and things like that. But this is actually, it runs in the same timeline. So there's on the top there is a temple. It was a round temple. They found ox bones and all sorts of things up there. In fact, they believe it's a healing temple. You can find the finds in Worthing Museum. One of the finds is like a broken leg, or it's like a plaster cast type of thing. It's
okay.
And also a fish. So it was Romano-British as well. It followed forward into Romano-British, and they found a beautiful enamelled fish brooch. So the scholars who've been looking at it think to themselves, do you know, those are the same sorts of finds that they find for Nodens on the River Severn. Yeah. So is that the same?
Kind of shows you that it travelled up and down the country. And whether borders were important at that point, we don't know. But they were definitely bringing their beliefs with them or taking them with them, whichever way it was going.
Yes.
Fascinating stuff, really.
So you've got the shaft that has the gods below and the
temple.
hill temples that has the gods above and surrounds, because you can actually see the sea from there. And Nodens could see, the one at Lydney, you could definitely see the water and the access to the sea, and you can see that from the top of the hill where the fort is. Well, not a fort. It's just, it's slightly fortish, but it's only tiny. I can see from the top of it, you can see Sisbury, which is the local
Sisbury Ring.
Sisbury Ring, and you can see Chanctonbury Ring, which has got 2 Roman temples on the top of it and is older than that. Yeah, you can see Chantry Hill, which, although there isn't necessarily anything definite about it, people believe that because there's a quarry at the top, so people think that before it was quarried, there may well have been a fort there as well.
Quite lots of things over the years have been moved. During the war, I believe, quite a lot of our standing stones and stuff were moved so that the farmers could use the fields for crops, etc. So we lost quite a lot of our features, didn't we? And they ended up sort of in local houses and holding up churches and all sorts of other stuff.
And people did use them as well. They needed building materials, so they went.
It's a shame, though. We still haven't got them, but, you know.
I know.
Now, one interesting thing. I was having a conversation with a mutual friend, quite a few years ago, just before I met you.
All right.
And she said, one of the people you must say hello to is Dragon Sue. And I thought, what a really weird way to refer to someone. And I thought, Dragon Sue? Why have you got this unusual nickname of Dragon Sue?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I wear it with pride. I love this name. I carve it in places. I often refer to myself as Dragon Sue. It came from, one of the camps, one of the Anderida camps. I was invited to give the talk. And it was about dragons. I'd given a talk at Witchfest, England, about dragons because I love them. They're absolutely gorgeous, if not slightly scary.
Well, just a bit.
But, yeah. And it was actually probably a throwaway comment by Dave the Bard.
Of course it was.
Yes. I owned it. I thought, yes.
So tell me a little bit about dragons. Are we talking about Sussex dragons or Welsh dragons?
But about all dragons, really.
Oh, okay.
I have a local one here. We have a local dragon called the Knucker, and it's more like a kelpie, I suppose, in effect that it is a water dragon. There's a bottomless pool. That is, in old belief, it was believed to be bottomless. And it's known as a Knucker hole. And the Knucker holes are all on the south side of the Downs.
Are they? No, I never knew that. I know there are a couple around, but I didn't realise they were all on the south side of the Downs.
The south side of the Downs, which is strange because then it's a well that's under the water. So you'd think, well, they'd be more likely to be closer to the sea. So why aren't they? So it's sort of like a really deep well, and they constantly bubble. And this one is, well, in the end, a church was built right next to it. A lot of the tales, there's the story of the Knucker of Lyminster. It's Lyminster in Sussex. And it's in the stained glass in the church there. And, absolutely glorious monster.
He's a glorious monster, but he's not our traditional view of, because people think dragons and they think the Welsh dragon, with the wings and the fire, and our Sussex dragons aren't really like that, are they? They're like snakes, really, or
worms.
Worms.
That's what they're called.
The other one
in Saxon, worms.
I was thinking about the one specifically at St Leonard's Forest, because that's supposed to be the last one killed, the last dragon killed in Sussex.
Yes.
And I've heard that may have been a Komodo dragon, actually.
It may have been. Yeah, it may have been a Komodo or another such large specimen. Whether it had lived here that long or whether it had been brought over by somebody who'd found them, it's difficult to say.
It's hard to know. So
but the reports are too good to ignore.
Oh yes, absolutely. I used to live near there, so it was my favourite dragon story, that one.
Yes, I bet.
And the other thing is, Welsh dragons. Tell me a little bit about Welsh dragons.
Well, Welsh dragons, they are associated with the King Arthurian stories and with Merlin, which makes them very intriguing. So you've got a red dragon, which is there and representative of the land of the British.
Sure.
So it's in Wales, but the British language was spoken more widely than Wales. Britain was wider than Wales. And there's a story about how the red dragon fights with the white dragon, which in tradition represents the Saxon hordes that have come in to try and take over and things like that. And so there's stories about that fight and trying to keep the balance. I believe the dragons perhaps had originally come over from France, because there's other stories in the Mabinogi that talk about, I can't remember, one's Levelis.
I don't know much about the...
No, but there are other stories. So you have, they've grown very much into that traditional 2 wings, 4-legged, fire-breathing dragons. There's also a certain amount of belief that could have come from the Roman armies, not so much during that time, but that certain aspects were taken on from that, and maybe the Celtic Dord and things like that they carried into battle, like a standard that when you rode fast, it roared and it looked like a dragon, and the flags and bits and pieces like that. And there's all sorts of stories. It's difficult to pinpoint them exactly, but we can't ignore. I don't think we can ignore anything at all. You can try and make logical statements about things. You can try and put it down to science, and a lot of science can answer the questions and a lot of science can't. But I think you're missing the point.
Yes.
Because, the point is that magic is all around you, and if you don't have an open mind, you don't see the magic.
Either you see it or you don't, really.
Yeah.
And one of my favourite dragon stories is about the Anderida world, and the people who lived there smelted iron, and that's where the fire-breathing dragons came from. People would know about dragons in this forest, and they would come and they would see the fire and the smoke and the heat. And that's where fire-breathing dragons in Sussex came from. I thought that was quite a nice story, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think that's gorgeous. I do have one tale about the suspension of belief. I went for a walk up to Chantry Hill, that I've just spoke about, and I was out walking with my best friend and her daughter, and we were walking along, and as I looked just across, I could see these rabbits running up the side of the hill.
Okay.
To the very top. When they got to the top, they turned into birds and they flew away.
Oh, wow.
So, I could say I was convinced they were rabbits. I said to my friend and her daughter, "Oh, look at those rabbits up there." And they said, "Oh, yes, look at them running up there. Oh, my goodness." Now, I could try and say it all logically. They were obviously birds, etc., etc., etc. But that takes away that beautiful moment in that walk when I actually saw shape-shifting.
Yes,
that's what I saw. That's what my brain saw.
And it takes away the magic.
Yes.
And we need magic at the moment.
We do need magic, yes.
I think we definitely need it.
Yes.
Moving on to magic, let's talk a bit about runes.
Yes.
Now, goodness, what a complicated subject runes is.
It is.
You've written a super book called The English Runes, Secrets of Magic, Spells and Divination, which is about Anglo-Saxon runes. Now, there's a lot of confusion about what Anglo-Saxon runes are, what Viking runes are. Could you put us straight, please? Tell us kind of what the difference is and how we would know the difference.
Well, first of all, I will tell you that one of the main reasons that runes were invented was as a writing system.
Oh.
Okay. And they're a writing system that is phonetic. Phonetic being that each of the runes has a sound of the language, and you put those sounds of the language. I wouldn't just say a letter, because some of them, like a th or a th sound, is 2 letters in modern English. It was one in printed language for a long time. So it's the sounds of the language so that you could actually write down those sounds.
Okay.
As you say a word. So you wouldn't spell it, in theory, you shouldn't spell it exactly the same as you would translate it into the English. So I wouldn't spell Suzanne with the runes that say Suzanne.
Mm-hmm.
I would spell them with the S and then the sound that's U, which is one letter. And then there isn't a Z, so it would be the S, and then it would be an sound and an N sound. So there's 5 letters in my name.
So it's phonetic spelling, essentially.
It's phonetic spelling.
Mm-hmm.
So they originated, as far as we can see, in the early Germanic societies.
Okay.
So it could have been BC. They've only traced them back to about 200 AD, maybe a little earlier.
Where were those early Germanic societies kind of set in Europe?
So they were set, obviously, where Germany is now, and the north, and into Scandinavia, because Germania, as the Romans called it, included Holland and Denmark and, well, Norway and mm-hmm. Sweden. So it's sort of, they went right the way through there. So that was the earliest one there is.
Right.
And it served quite a long time to be able to, for writing.
How many letters, how many runes were in that particular
24.
Order? So 24. And did that have a name? Were they that Elder Futhark.
Because as far as people can see, it's the oldest one.
So this is the one that we kind of see. You see, if somebody's seen Vikings and the runes on there, that's what we're looking at, is the Elder Futhark.
Yes and no.
Okay. I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Yes. Just to complicate matters. So, there were more than rune sets than we tend to look at now. There was a Gothic rune set. There were all sorts of rune sets that had slightly different letters, perhaps, or not quite as many, because their language sounded slightly differently.
Yes, yeah.
Now, what happened to the Norse runes was quite late on, and this is after the English runes, Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Frisian, for a long time, at the same time as people went to Viking up in the northern regions, a new language called Norse, Proto-Norse, came into being. So Proto-Norse was perhaps a little bit closer to the Germanic root.
Right.
Then Old Norse came in, and they then decided to change their writing system a bit.
Okay.
So they've actually reduced the Viking runes, or the Old Norse runes have actually been reduced down to 16 runes.
Okay. Not
nearly as many.
No.
Sometimes they have extra dots. I haven't managed to learn all of it. It is quite complex.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and are they phonetic again? Like
they are phonetic again, but might have, some of them have more than one sound.
Okay.
So it might cover more than one sound, and it's in the reading that you start to learn exactly how it changes.
So how did we get to Anglo-Saxon runes from there?
So we didn't get to it from the Norse runes.
Oh, okay.
We got to it from the Elder Futhark.
Mm-hmm.
So in the area where they believe is the root of the Anglo-Saxon people, so we're looking at around Holland and a bit of Denmark and things, in that sort of area, there's a place called Frisia.
Okay.
Well, there was a place called Frisia. There's still a place called Frisia. It actually has a separate language to the Dutch that surrounds it.
Yeah, it's a kind of, it's got a mixture of Dutch and French, is that right?
Not.
Or not?
No.
Completely wrong. Okay.
So. It actually sounds a bit more like English than Dutch does.
Oh, right. Okay.
And there is, and we can trace an Anglo-Frisian Futhark or Futhark. Yeah. So this is what the Anglo-Saxon runes are based on. So it's the same rune set. So it was shared between the Old Frisians and Us. I didn't mean the old cows when I'm talking about Frisians.
So we've got this set of runes that
Yes.
comes from the Frisian region or originated there. And how many runes are there in that set?
There are, I believe, 28 or 29. I think it probably 29 because in what I would call the English runes, that's 29 of them, with an additional few more.
Okay. Where do the additional few more come from?
Okay. So there is a poem called the Old English Rune Poem. And the Old English Rune Poem has 29 verses.
Okay.
Yes? Now, on the original copy, because the original was lost in a fire, on the first copy of that, they've got added a few more. I think there's 4 or 5 more.
Okay.
And it's believed that they might be, they could be Viking runes, because some of them are based on the Elder Fusark, and a lot of them are what they call bind runes, which I think we might talk about a bit later. But bind runes are when there's more than one rune together. And the association they seem to have is because a lot of, up in the north of the country, a lot of the church crosses and things like that had carvings on them in runes. So English runes, not Scandinavian or the Germanic. In the English runes, there's the Ruthwell cross is one of them. Now, because of Latin and because of the pronunciation of, say, Christ, would not necessarily be as you would come across it in English, they then create another sound that is specifically for the writing, strangely. So in Old English, you've got a k sound, but you don't have a ch sound as such.
Right.
It might be a mix of two, more than one rune, but there isn't a specific rune for the ch sound, but there is for the k sound.
Okay.
So Christ is one of the words on the Ruthwell cross, and so there's actually a rune for that, but it doesn't have a verse from the poem.
Oh, so that's an extra rune.
So the poem's quite old. So it's closer to an original way of learning the runes and finding the meanings of each of those runes can be found in studying.
So this is what you used when you wrote your book?
Yes.
Okay.
I thought I will stick to the poem.
Okay.
Because it's beautiful.
And what inspired you to put it into a book? Because obviously it's quite it's an avid interest of yours. You can see you love it.
It is.
But what suddenly did you wake up one morning and go, I've got to share this with the world? Or
it took quite a few years of my friends and people I've spoken to say, write a book. And I'm thinking, I'm not an author. I can't write a book. And they'd be going, write a book. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to write that book.
And it's an amazing book. It's very, very easily understood.
Yes.
And to be fair, I actually love the book. What I wanted to say specifically is some books can lose you. Some books about runes, you pick them up and go, I don't understand the first paragraph. Whereas this is really accessible. So if anybody wants to know about runes, this is the book to buy. It's absolutely wonderful, especially English runes. So, so you're working with the English runes now.
Yes.
Of course, the other thing people are going to know is what can they do with them apart from spell their names phonetically?
There are various things that people can do with them. Most of it involves writing, but one of the things that I love, as I was saying at the beginning when we started chatting, I talked about the Awin and how I was drawn to that chant, is that runes can be used in chanted magic.
Wonderful.
And For me, because also I love to believe in an animistic way. That is, I love to be in the life that is in everything.
Yeah.
Even the main road outside my house. It was created. It is life that has been created. But we can all think about it in animals and everything else like that. But for me, everything
has life.
Has life. So I'm working on that, and also from what I learned from when I was doing witchcraft is that you can create thought forms that then live within the atmosphere, within the air, that you can connect to and things.
So a thought form is an idea of something.
Yes.
A living idea of something.
About it, and perhaps doing something repetitively then creates that into like a spirit shape.
Okay.
Along with the runes, the Saxons definitely believed in weird.
Okay.
So weird is where the English word weird comes from. It's not that weird. It's actually really the connection of absolutely everything to everything.
It's a web, isn't it? It's described as a web.
Yes. It's an English word, so even when you get the Norse heathens and that, they talk about weird, and that's an English word.
But it's a magical web that connects everything. Would that be right?
It is, yes. Sort of. It can be like telephone lines, so you could send messages along there, and you can send healing through this web. You travel your own personal web, so when you're born, you're tied onto the web of weird, and then you travel along, and you have choices all along the way.
Yeah.
And you choose which path to go, because as with any web, it's joined in all sorts of places.
So this enables you to use your runes for magic, because you can use the web, right? Yes.
And I believe that the runes as a sound form live within weird.
Okay.
Yes. They've been chanted in various forms. There isn't a specific sound for each rune. It's what you feel, and you have a connection to the runes through that. You can chant it, you can sing it, you can growl it.
Okay. So whatever's appropriate, whatever inspires you at that point with that particular rune.
Yes. And quite often if you study the rune, then you start to understand what the rune is about, especially for you, when you've looked at the rune verse that goes with the rune, and you've perhaps studied it, thought about how it was like when it was written down, so back in Anglo-Saxon times.
Sure.
And how that might relate to now. And then you can feel a sound coming on. So the second one in the Futhark, or Futhark is what it's called in the Elder Futhark, and Futhark, because there's a slight sound change.
Okay.
The oo sound stands for the oryx, huge, great big bull, who will have a deep growl and is absolutely huge. So if you're chanting Ur, you're going to chant a deep, strong sound.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So and that is an explanation of.
So if you did that, you'd be chanting. Can you chant magic? Can you use it to chant magic?
Yes, you can.
Chant intention?
Yes, you can.
And use the web to do it?
Yes, exactly. So you would find the rune that matches or would help in a situation, and you would chant that across. And that is a way of attaching your intent for magic along with with the rune, and asking the rune to help you strengthen that intent as it travels along to its final destination.
I think that's wonderful. I love it. It's really good. I really like that. Now, do you think that runes would have been used by everyday people, or they would have been sort of, I don't know, healers of the community that would have used them?
It's a difficult one. It's really, really difficult because most of them were carved on wood and bone and things that don't remain. So there's very few finds that remain, except for the stone carvings. But over here, the stone carvings are not like in the Scandinavian countries. They're like the Ruthwell Cross. So they weren't actually put on there until the 11th century, perhaps, 9th to 12th century. So then you've got the scholars in the church. They were written by the scholars in the church. Mm-hmm. Albeit their history might have been pagan, and they might still have had those old stories, and they've sort of melded the stories, like in the Ruthwell Cross, where the poem is the cross actually talking about the death of Christ.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's not the church turning around and saying, this is what the death of Christ was like. We've got a piece of the cross or whatever. This is the cross talking about when Jesus was crucified. So that shows the early belief system, the animistic type of belief system that was there. So those are the later ones. But I will say that I've recently watched a university talk on the Norse runes up in Orkney.
Oh, right. Okay.
Now, in Orkney, in a place called Mace Howe, there are a lot of carvings of the Norse runes from about the 12th century. Yeah, 1100s.
Okay.
And the scholar who was giving the talk said is, these, which I know are graffiti, this is graffiti. This is written by the common man. You haven't got a rune master going in there and carving. I want it to say Sigurd was here.
No, agreed.
Sigurd wrote it himself.
Yes. Yeah.
So that showed then that the ordinary people, because it was carved by ordinary people, were actually more literate
than we first thought.
Than was first thought. And I don't see why we can't put that back into the earlier days as well. No. It's phonetic, so you just need to hear the sound and you need to know what the sounds look like to put them together.
I do wonder how much we underestimate our ancestors sometimes. I think
we underestimate them.
I think they were much more like us than we realise.
And what I say to people is, when you're looking at an early human from the Neolithic, the Mesolithic, whichever ithic you want to, remember that they thought in the same way as you. Yes. They just don't have the same technology.
It's the technology that makes the difference. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So while we're still on runes.
Yes.
And you mentioned bind runes earlier.
Yes.
What other kinds of magic can you do? Can you use bind runes? And there's because of the whole sigils thing as well, which kind of confuses me with runes. And
yes. Well, sigils really is like a picture. So a bind rune can be a sigil. So a bind rune is several, or even anything from 2 to several different runes that are put together to make a sigil. They can't really be read. Yes, so you were put them together in a way that you wouldn't necessarily know what those runes were.
Right.
But the person making the magic knows what those runes are.
Okay. And how would you use a bind rune?
So you can use that for a talisman. Mm-hmm. You can use that for healing.
Okay.
Yeah? Amulets to protect yourself against things. And you can... I think that's anything that you would use written magic for.
Okay. You could use this for curses as well.
We've only talked about, well.
But do you think it was used for curses?
Yes, it would have been, because there's nothing better than a curse in healing.
Absolutely.
One of my favourite of the healing charms, which I've started writing the book on the Old English charms. Wow. So that will be interesting. But one of my favourite is the charm against a wen, and a wen was a growth. Mm-hmm. Yeah? That is the best curse I've ever seen. But what you're doing is you're cursing the illness. You're cursing the creature that is the illness that is growing wherever.
To leave.
Wonderful. Yeah. So, yes, you can use it for curses,
It's amazing. It's so there's so much you can do with runes, and
Yes.
a lot of us look at them and go, Lord of the Rings, or you don't realise the history behind them or the magic behind them. I know that there's runes local to us, isn't there? Is it Stenning Church that's got runes?
It is said to have. I've looked at it. I don't think they are.
Ah,
But
okay.
Personally, I've looked there. I think it's just carving. But yes, they are associated with Stenning Church because Stenning Church had a wondrous saint called Saint Cuthman.
Mm-hmm.
If you translate him into English, it's like a relationship man. And for me, there's one rune called Ing, which is like two crosses on top of each other.
Yeah.
So it's got that diamond shape in the middle. And Ing was like a fertility god.
Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in the poem, it talks about how Ing travels to the east, taking a cart with him.
Okay.
Pulling a cart. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
or pushing a cart. But he travels to the east, to the land of the Danes, I think, and he's held very special there. Now, the story of St. Cuthman has him growing up. He's a shepherd,
Okay.
so he's very close to the land. His father dies. His mother is crippled. He lives on land that isn't very rich. So he promises, in this case, the church, that he will take his mother. So he built a cart for his mother. He put his mother in the cart and he headed east. He headed
Wonderful.
east until he got to Stenning, where he had promised that he would stop where he felt a sign had happened. On the way, he'd cursed a load of people harvesting in a field, which also shows the fertility of the land aspect. He cursed them, said it would rain every time they tried to harvest the field.
Oh.
And he ended up at Stenning, where part of the he had a rope around his neck. It had broken once, and this is the second time it broke, and he knew he couldn't mend it anymore. So that was the sign for him to stop.
And built a church.
He built a church. It also states in his story, in the church story, that he built a house for his mother.
Oh.
And then he built a church. And this church was between two streams that came down from the hill. So the streams came from the same point and ended up in the big river, which is and so basically it was surrounded by water. Then there's other bits and pieces, but in the end you have a church that was built by somebody who travelled east, who was very much to do with fertility and everything else like that. He took his mother, and then you have a relationship with old Germanic story about Nerthus, who was a goddess who once a year decided she wanted to see her people, and her priests took her around in a cart, and everybody put down all of their weapons and all of their iron, which suggests it was early. It was pre-Iron Age. And she was, and they all made love and all of those things that happen with
fertility
of the land.
Yeah. Interesting how the stories all sort of layer upon each other, isn't it?
Yes. So they you can see the roots. So that's one of the stories that I absolutely love, and why Stenning is so special.
It is an amazing place.
Yeah.
So if somebody would, and I've actually seen this recently, somebody on one of the groups has said, I don't know anything about runes. Where should somebody start if they want to start and look into runes? Because obviously you've told us some fascinating stuff about them, and I'm sure people are going to come away from listening to this and go, what can I do? Where can I find? Where can they find your books? And is there anything else you would recommend that they read or watch? Or
I would say, yes, please start with my book. My book, and not because I necessarily want to sell it, but because they do sell when people find it. And I get a lot of lovely write-ups from people. And I will contact people when they want to talk to me and things like that. I think it's important to learn for yourself. Now, a lot of rune books, a lot of it's all based on the Elder Futhark.
Yep.
As I explain in my book, the Elder Futhark is great. We know it's the older set of runes. It didn't have a rune poem with it. It didn't have any explanation of what the sounds were or what each of them meant.
Okay.
So following that, you have the Old English rune poem, which is the next one that was written down, and we have a copy of. And then you have even younger ones so that was about the 11th century.
Right.
At the latest, they believe it was the 9th. The poem was perhaps earliest written down in the 9th century. The copy came from an 11th century copy. This was written down by monks, do you think? Yes, okay. Very probably. And the Norse, there's a Norse rune poem and an Icelandic, so they're both Norse, really. And they're much later, they're 13th to 15th century.
Right.
Depending on which one. They have only 16 runes.
Yep.
The English rune poem has 29, which definitely covers the 24 that are in the Elder Futhark.
Okay.
Therefore, you will find that anybody who writes about the Elder Futhark is the original inspiration comes from the Old English rune poem.
Sure.
And the other two,
which goes back to the same thing, really.
Yes. And then another thing I find is everybody has their own slight spin because things speak to you, like tarot cards. You might learn what tarot cards mean, but as you start to read tarot cards and start to use tarot cards, you find that the cards speak to you personally.
Sure.
So they're actually relating to you. So as I was saying, with the runes being on weird, you're building a relationship so that they can help you. So your relationship develops. Now that happens with everybody, whether they realise it or not. Mm-hmm. So they learn the runes and they write down what they believe the runes to mean because it means to them.
Yes.
Doesn't mean to say it means the same to you or anybody else.
It's a very personal system, even more so than the tarot, isn't it?
Yes. And so I would say, because the whole point of my book was, one, to make it understandable to people.
Which it definitely does. Because
I really don't like to listen to people talking who try and talk over people's head just to try and make it more important and authentic. You're talking to people. People are wanting to know. Mm-hmm. So I try and translate what was in the academic writings into something that means something to people today. So I started with the rune poem, and then I asked people to have a look at that. I give some suggestions as to what it might have been like originally, what the early English lived like. So what that rune may have meant to them, and encourage people to have a think about that, and also have a think about, everything. The more practice you get, the more it relates to. And I suggest people perhaps to go to reenactments, to see what different weapons look like at that time, and all sorts of ways of learning.
And there are workbooks that go with it. It's a diary and workbook. I've got the workbook. It's the other one I don't have.
Yeah, basically there are two workbooks. There's a workbook that gives you quite a few pages for each of the runes, so you can make your own notes, and you can go back to it and you can rewrite later on. Mm-hmm. So you can have a look and see, well, this is what I thought then, and this is how it's developing now.
Yes.
The other one is really for doing rune castings for yourself. So you could just draw one rune out for the day. You could ask a question. How is today going to pan out? You look at the rune. You can read the rune verse for that rune. Have a think about it, write down your notes, get to the end of the day and see if there was anything that actually related to that, or perhaps something else cropped up during the day that you could relate.
Sure. Do you think the Anglo-Saxons would have used runes in that way? Would they have cast them to give them guidance, or like we do, take them out of a bag and cast them, or would they simply have used them in the ways you've spoken about, bind runes and...
There is no proof of it, so nobody can prove that scientifically. But I believe that there was. I truly believe that when Tacitus went to the Germanic peoples and he talked about, he wrote down about the family or the group with the priest, or the family with the father, and they cast lots that were made out of wood with sigils or things that were pre-carved on there.
Sure.
And they picked up 3 of them and then divined the future. Answered the questions with that.
Because obviously, look, I think a lot of people think of runes in that way.
Yes.
I think a lot of books and sort of advertising and stuff sells them in that way, but there's so much more.
Yes.
And like you say, there are some books that you just pick up, or there's even videos actually that you start watching and go, actually, you need to start at the beginning. And that's where your books come in. They're brilliant for that. And links to where you can buy Sue's books will be in the show notes, as will be the link to the rune poem and everything else. Now, before we finish, you've been amazing, Sue. Thank you so much. But I have one more question for you. I asked my previous interviewee to come up with a question for my present interviewee. And Eva, the lovely Eva, came up with a question for you. If you could create another rune, what would it be?
This is so difficult.
She said she thought you might come out with one immediately and have one prepared. So
no, it's really difficult. If only because there are 29 runes there already, and I've actually done a few online rune courses. And, it's a long time because there are 29 runes.
Yes.
And it's amazing how much every single one of those runes can relate to you now. It was very cathartic in a lot of ways. I don't think there was anything missing. That's the trouble. So, if I was to create another rune, it would be a bind rune, but it wouldn't be a rune on its own. Because I can't think of another sound either.
Yeah, you haven't come across a sound that there isn't a rune for at the moment?
No.
Although you did say ch. There wasn't one for ch.
Well, there is in the Northumbrian runes. It just doesn't have a verse with it, which is why I didn't choose that. But I would find it really difficult. I don't want to create one for the pretty.
No, of course not. You want one that's usable.
Yeah, so I can honestly say, after having been through the runes several times, having studied everything in depth, that it touches every single part of human life. And even up to today, there's a rune about it's the horse rune, really. It's called in English, and it's about the steed and how the guys get together and they admire their steeds and they boast about their steeds. And I'm thinking, well, that's a motor car if ever you saw one.
Absolutely, yes, of course, yeah.
So there's so much that you can see that the way people behaved back then. You can find in there, and we all behave exactly the same. We haven't really changed.
No.
All that's changed is our technologies and things like that. And I don't really want to create a rune that just means an oven.
No, or a computer, or no.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think you've definitely answered that question. Thank you so much for agreeing to the interview.
You're very, very welcome. All my books on Amazon, by the way.
Yep, we're gonna put all the links to your books. We will put the American link as well as the English link for Amazon. Your website we'll put on the.
Yeah, I have a Facebook page as well.
And Facebook page, all your socials will have everything on the show notes. So if you want to know about anything that Sue has spoken about, we'll try and put links to everything in the show notes.
Yes, and for anybody who links into my Facebook page, that's the rune one. I did a whole study at the beginning of all of the coronavirus, and I drew some runes every day.
Okay.
And then wrote about them as that day was, which is quite interesting. I haven't done it for a little while, but there's nothing to say that I'm not going to go in and start again.
Thank you very much. Do come and visit again and have another interview after your next book. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
It's been brilliant. And I'm very, very pleased that your virtual bed is so large that it's properly socially distanced.
I know, it's wonderful, isn't it? An 8.5 foot bed. You see, everybody needs one of these.
Yeah, I have an ordinary double, not even a king size.
I know. Yeah, we just extended the poles at the corners. It was ever so easy.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you so much, Sue, and we hope to talk to you again in the future.
Thank you.
Take
care, Ruthie.
And you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's the end of our show today. If you enjoyed this interview, please do give us a review onto iTunes and come and say hello on the Facebook page at facebook.com/inbedwithadruid, or on Twitter @inbedwithadruid, or on Instagram @inbedwithadruid. The links and mentions in today's show can be found in the show notes at inbedwithadruid.com. Thank you for listening, and come and cosy up on the next full moon for another different interview in Bed with a Druid. This podcast is a Celtic Myth Show production.